Ceann Comhairle targim go léifar an billa lasa Sóisialach 2011 and Dara Ur. I move that the Social Welfare Bill 2011 now be read a second time. The Social Welfare Bill will give legislative effect to certain social welfare measures announced in the budget statement of the 5th of December 2011, which are due to come into effect from the 1st of January 2012. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said recently that Europe faces its toughest hours since the Second World War. We are certainly dealing with a global financial crisis of enormous proportions. The European Union is at one of its most important junctures in its history as European leaders grapple with a banking, sovereign debt and currency crisis that has already lasted 4 whole years. The initial crisis in Ireland was homegrown, caused in large part by a reckless Fianna Fáil-led government with their greedy developer pals, reckless bankers and lame regulators. The homegrown problems have, however, been made greatly more difficult by the global financial crisis and the euro crisis in particular. We have only a modest role as a country to play in resolving the euro crisis. However, the job of getting the books balanced is one which is definitely within our control. It is vital that this government secures economic recovery in our country. To do this, we must put the public finances back on a sustainable footing. We have to bridge the gap between government expenditure and revenue, which is currently filled by borrowing. At present, there is a shortfall of 16 billion in the government's finances. Unless the rate of borrowing is reduced, the burden of debt servicing will take up an increasing proportion of tax revenue. This would mean that expenditure on vital schemes and services, such as those provided by the Department of Social Protection, would become increasingly unsustainable. The government decided to make an adjustment of 3.8 billion between tax and spending in 2012. Of this, 1.4 billion is to come from day-to-day spending, including health, welfare and education. As the biggest spending department, the Department of Social Protection must play its part in that adjustment. This department currently accounts for approximately 40% of all current government expenditure. This means that 4 in every 10 euros that the government spends are spent on social protection. The reality is that it is not possible to stabilise and reduce public spending without any impact on my department's budget. However, despite this extremely challenging financial environment in which we find ourselves, the adjustment in social protection spending next year will be limited to 475 million, or just over 2% of the department's spend. This compares with a reduction of 810 million in 2010 and a reduction of 515 million in 2009 when the previous government was in power. Some of the Fianna Fáil benches have been critical of these measures, and I can assure you that these are not the measures I would have hoped to introduce in my first budget. But let me be very clear, this government has done more to protect the people who turn to the Department of Social Protection for help than its predecessor ever did. We have promised. We have also remembered those who are working on low incomes and not claiming social protection. They are equally entitled to be served by the attentions of this government in helping to remove some of the burden of the universal social charge. We have minimised, insofar as is possible, the spending reduction in social protection because we recognise that people are totally dependent on the support provided by the state to enable them to eat, to keep themselves warm, to provide shelter for themselves and their families, and to bring up the next generation of Irish workers and citizens. There are many people out there who are new to need, as a result of this deep and prolonged recession. On the outside, they are coping, but behind closed doors, they are just about making ends meet. I want to make sure that these people do not slide helplessly into a cycle of deprivation and long-term welfare dependency. I want to protect them from the worst consequences of this very deep recession by delivering on this government's promise not to cut primary social welfare payments. I want to ensure that the communities they live in remain sustainable, and welfare spending contributes to this by stimulating and supporting local economies. I want to make clear that the measures contained in the Social Welfare Bill follow very detailed analysis and discussions by both parties in government. Tough decisions had to be taken on where to reduce expenditure, while at the same time trying to minimise the impact on those most in need. Before I detail the areas where changes are being made, I would like to outline first the supports which are being fully maintained at their current level, so as to provide reassurance to people who had been concerned that they might be cut. This government has delivered on its promise not to cut primary social welfare rates. The personal rates of all weekly payments, such as job seekers' benefit and allowance, illness benefit, invalidity pension, disability allowance, blind pension, carers benefit, carers allowance, state pensions, widows' pensions and one-parent family payment will not be reduced next year. In addition, increases which are paid for spouses and partners and dependent children are fully protected. Extra allowances which are paid to pensioners who live alone and those who are aged over 80 will continue at their current rates. The free travel scheme and free TV licence will not change. The half-rate carers allowance scheme and the extra payment for caring for more than one person are retained, as well as the respite care grant at its current value of €1,700 per annum. I turn now to the question of support for families. In 2011, supports for children and families accounts for 12% of the total social welfare expenditure, or nearly €3 billion, of which €2 billion will go on child benefit. As we all know, the environment in which a child grows up is a major determinant of health and success in adulthood. Social protection resources must be targeted to ensure that those most in need of support receive it, but also to ensure that supports are used in the best way possible in the formative years. The budgetary measures that directly affect child-related payments are measured, and the rates of payment continue to ensure that the needs of families are met. The standard rate of child benefit will remain unchanged at €140 per month. There will be no reduction in child benefit for the first and second child. And importantly for women in this country, it remains a universal payment paid to the caring parent, usually the mother. I find it amazing that Sinn Féin is so critical of this measure when you consider child benefit in Northern Ireland is just €67.70 a month for the second and other children. I have a question for Deputy Adams and for Deputy Osnodic. How can you stand over paying the woman in Newry just 67? How can you stand over? How can Sinn Féin stand over paying the woman in Newry €67.70 for her second child, while criticising this government for maintaining we're maintaining the rate at €140 for both the first and second children. Let me remind you, in 2012, the monthly rate for the third child in the Republic will be €148. It will be €160 for the fourth and each subsequent child. How come your party can only manage to extract €67.70 for the second and other children from your paymasters in Westminster, whereas we can still manage in this Republic to manage to spend $140 per month, despite being in a bailout programme? Will you answer me that? Why is the child living? Why is the child living in Lifford less deserving than the child who's living in Strabane?
Sorry, could I have order for the minister, please? Deputy. Deputy Sluthy.
I appreciate.
Deputy Sluthy, we're not having a debate. We're having the minister, and that's enough.
I appreciate the reductions in child benefit.
Chair this stall. I'm chairing at the moment now. Minister, please.
I appreciate that reductions in child benefit will be difficult for some families. However, the provision of cash supports for children is only part of the solution to providing better long-term outcomes for our children. Ireland has comparatively generous child benefit rates, but this does not guarantee that our children fare better when they become adults. We need to look at the way in which we are using money to address these problems to find better and more sustainable outcomes for our children. Since being appointed as Minister for Social Protection in March this year, I've looked with fresh eyes at the existing social protection system. One of my key priorities has been, frankly, to balance the books, in particular by starting to put the Social Insurance Fund on a sustainable footing. The fund is expected to have a deficit of €1.5 billion in 2012, of €1.9 billion this year, and another €1.5 billion in 2012. Rebates to employers and lump sums paid directly to employees are paid from the Social Insurance Fund. I consider that the level of rebate of 60% is not sustainable in the current economic climate. I am proposing, therefore, to reduce the rebate to 15%, and while this may cause difficulties for some employers, it should be noted that redundancy rebate payments to employers are not common in many EU and other jurisdictions. In the UK, for example, the redundancy payment is funded 100% by the employer, and there is no recovery from the state. Given the low level of employer PRSI payable in Ireland, I do not see why we should dip into a fund that is already in deficit to compensate often profitable companies for the cost of making their employees redundant in Ireland, and in some cases transferring their employments wholesale abroad. I think we should be spending our money on retaining jobs, not in incentivising redundancy. And this is a change I think we'll have to adapt to in this country, because that's what happens in countries like Germany. And I think we need to learn how we actually retain jobs rather than incentivise redundancy. A core principle of sustainable social protection systems in advanced economies is that citizens receive benefits in proportion to their contributions. Some of the changes that I'm introducing today in the area of pensions puts this principle into practice. Another principle is that we should gradually move towards a system where everyone should have an entitlement to one weekly income support payment only, with no special arrangements or top-ups for particular groups. It's no longer possible to have a social welfare system where some people get more than one primary weekly payment if we want to avoid reducing the level of weekly payments generally. We have delivered on our promise to retain core rates, but we are discontinuing entitlements to certain concurrent payments where some people end up getting more than one social welfare payment in a week. Just over half the savings announced come from 5 main measures. First, I'm reducing the rebate for companies who make staff redundant. Second, the fuel allowance will in future be payable for 26 weeks, a reduction of 6 weeks. The level of the allowance and its duration has greatly increased during the last 10 years. The scheme is unsustainable given the increase in numbers and costs and the fiscal position of the state. Of course, we are still paying the fuel allowance for the coldest 6 months of the year, mid-October to mid-April. It has always been the case, and will continue to be the case, that a person who's in difficulty with fuel or energy costs can go to their community welfare service. This service, from the 1st of October, has been integrated into my department, and they are ready to assist people in difficulty. Third, I'm reducing child benefit to €148 for the third child, while the rate for the fourth child is reduced to €160. Fourth, I'm increasing the minimum contribution to rent or mortgage interest supplement by €6 a week for a single person and €11 a week for a couple. Curtailing access to the mortgage interest supplement scheme is consistent with the Keane report on mortgage arrears. I'm determined to get value for the €500 million which the department is spending on rent supplement each year. Fifth, the amounts of earnings disregarded for the purpose of one parent family payments means test will be reduced from €146.50 per week to €130 per week next year. There are also a number of other changes to the one-parent family payment scheme. The scheme cost €1.1 billion in 2010, up from €751 million in 2005. Despite these significant levels of spending on one-parent families, the results have been poor in terms of tackling poverty and providing for social inclusion. The budget announcements included a number of other measures which are not provided for in this bill. Some of these measures relate to non-statutory schemes and do not require legislative amendments. Other measures will be implemented through regulations and through legislation to be brought forward early in 2012. In this regard, I want to specifically welcome the PRSI base broadening measures, which has been agreed by my colleague Michael Noonan, Minister for Finance, in the budget. The revenues of over €50 million to be raised by these measures will contribute to filling the €1.5 billion hole in the Social Insurance Fund. I also want to welcome Mr Noonan's recognition that absenteeism is a problem in both the public and the private sectors in Ireland, and in 2012 I will be bringing forward proposals to deal with absenteeism in both the public and private sectors and engaging in discussions with all of the interested parties and stakeholders. I will also be introducing changes to community employment schemes. The number of CE schemes operating currently is over 1,100, with 23,000 participants, with an overall budget of €360 million. We will seek value for money review of schemes, emphasising good outcomes and experience for participants. The National Training Fund will provide €4.2 million for training on CE in 2012. In addition, Solus will continue to provide access to training programmes for CE participants. The Department of Social Protection will be spending €977 million on employment supports, including CE schemes, in 2012, up from €882 million in 2011. That is an increase of €95 million in the budget for 2012. It is in that context that reforms and how labour market activation and labour market supports, including CE, are funded and managed is being looked at. This includes looking at the funding received from other sources, including statutory organisations. I want to say that community employment schemes provide a very important and valued contribution to social employment and training for unemployed people. And many community employment schemes, as members right across this House are aware, provide vital community services right across the country.
Minister.
In addition, there are community and voluntary sponsoring organisations that receive funding from a multiplicity of state agencies, and these will be examined in terms of their ability to continue the programme with funding from the Department of Social Protection. The Department of Social Protection will be working very closely with the Department of Education and Skills with a view to the provision of training for CE schemes. I want to welcome the fact that my colleague Minister Brendan Howlin has allocated another 20 million for activation measures to help to get people back to work, education or training, including a planned programme for people with disability. As the government signalled yesterday, I will be proposing an amendment at committee stage to withdraw sections 8 and 9 and 10 of the bill. These are the measures I had proposed to reform the disability allowance and the domiciliary care allowance. I want to say that I'm sorry if this proposal caused any anxiety among people with disabilities and their families. I've listened in particular to the concerns of families with severely disabled children. And I have asked Barrister Mazita Mangan, who chairs the advisory group on tax and social welfare, and her committee, the group, to carry out a review of the domiciliary care allowance and the disability allowance in relation to children and young adults. I want to now mention some main provisions of the bill. Last Corla, with just how much time I've left?
You've 8 minutes, Minister.
How many?
8 minutes.
Thank you. Section 3 of the bill provides for the abolition of entitlement to the payment of disablement benefit in the case of assessments of loss of faculty amounting to less than 15%, with effect from the beginning of January 2012. Section 4 provides for discontinuing the current entitlement to the payment of a half-rate child increase where the spouse, civil partner or cohabitant of the beneficiary has a weekly income in excess of a prescribed amount of 400 in the case of new claimants of carers benefit, state pension contributory, state pension transition and invalidity pension, with effect from the beginning of July 2012. This section also extends the reference to the spouse of the beneficiary. And existing claimants in receipt of the half-rate QCI will not be affected. Section 5 provides that the implementation of certain provisions of Schedule 6 of the Social Welfare Consolidation Act of 2005 related to the changes in the entitlement conditions for state pension contributory and state pension transition, with effect from the 6th of April 2012, will not apply to existing recipients of those pensions. Section 6 provides for increasing the number of qualifying contributions required to qualify for the widowers and surviving civil partners' contributory pensions. Existing pensioners will not be affected by these changes, and I will be proposing an amendment at committee stage to change this section to increase the number of paid PRSI contributions required to qualify for these pensions from 156 to 260 from December 2013. Section 7 provides for the discontinuance with effect from January 2012 of the transitional measures which enable the one-parent family payment to continue to be paid for a period of up to 6 months where a claimant's weekly earnings exceed €425. Existing one-parent family recipients who are benefiting from these transitional measures at the beginning of January 2012 will continue to receive the transitional payment for the unexpired balance of the 6 months period. Sections 8, 9 and 10, as I have just said, I will be proposing an amendment at committee stage to withdraw sections 8, 9 and 10 of the bill. Section 11 provides for the discontinuance of the payment of the grant for multiple births under the Child Benefit Scheme with effect from the 1st of January 2012. It also provides for the phased alignment of the different rates of monthly child benefit payable according to the family size into a single rate. The rates payable to the third and subsequent qualified children will be reduced with effect from the 1st of January 2012 and further reduced from the 1st of January 2013, when there will be a single rate of €140 for each qualified child. Section 12 reduces the period for backdating claims to long-term contributory pensions, such as the state pension contributory and other payments, from up to 12 months before the claim was made to 6 months. The new backdating arrangements will apply to such payments made from the beginning of April of 2012. Section 13 amends the rules relating to the assessment of means for certain social assistance payments, including the abolition of the income disregard for income from employment by the HSE as a home help in the case of all social assistance payment schemes, and increasing the proportion of incomes from farming and fishing assessed as means from 70% to 85% for the purposes of the Farm Assist and Job Seekers Allowance schemes. These amendments will apply to new and existing claimants with effect from the 1st of January 2012. Section 14 provides for the purposes of calculating means of the one-parent family payment that the weekly earnings disregard is being decreased from $146.50 over a period of 5 years to the same rate as job seekers. The annual reductions in the weekly disregard will apply to both new and existing one-parent family claimants. Section 15 provides for amendments to the Redundancy Payments Act. Well, if we get our economic recovery, we will hopefully in a year or two be able to review all of this as we go forward, and I've no difficulty giving that undertaking on behalf of the government, because we will be able then to increase the disregards for people on job seekers and bring both into alignment. It's just not affordable at the moment in the context of the resources available to the government. Section 15 provides for amendments to the Redundancy Payments Act by way of a reduction from 60% to 15% in the rebates paid to employers from the Social Insurance Fund. This reduction will apply to employers on or after the 1st of January 2012 in respect of the statutory redundancy lump sum payments made to employees who are made redundant on or after the 1st of January 2012. I have already stated that I'll be introducing a number of amendments at committee stages, changes to PRSI by extension of liability for share-based remuneration and the abolition of employer PRSI relief on employee pension contributions, and changes to discontinue for new claimants entitlement to receive a weekly social welfare payment where a person is also participating on a community employment scheme. The transition to a more balanced budget simply cannot be made without reductions in social welfare spending. It's not possible to stabilise and reduce public spending without any impact on the department's budget. If we do not make these changes now, we risk making the economic situation far worse for everyone, including welfare recipients in the long term. We've done our best to protect the most vulnerable members of our society by maintaining the primary weekly social welfare rates and the main child benefit rates, so that people can have confidence and assurance about their primary income either on a weekly or a monthly basis from social welfare. And that is also important in terms of the power and importance of the social welfare spend. At 40% of all of the spending that this government makes into our economies in every town and village up and down the country. I want, even after these savings, this government will spend $20.5 billion on social protection in 2012. And I think that that sends a very strong signal of how we place in this government a very great value on the role of welfare in protecting our citizens at this extraordinary difficult time. But I want to say this in terms of the budget overall. The people who work on low incomes, and earlier in the year I reinstated the minimum wage specifically for people on low incomes to protect them. I think this House has to have regard to working families going out and working every day, receiving very low incomes, which is why this government has emphasised the reduction in the universal social charge for families on very low incomes. Yes, we have to protect people who are on social welfare, but we also have to provide within the social welfare budget, and particularly in relation to areas like CE, with which I personally have a very long involvement. We have to provide transition to work. We have to provide arrangements for people to transit to work, to education and training. I am inundated by people who want places in training and in education. One day the recession will end, and we want the people who unfortunately at the moment are depending on social welfare and job seekers because they can't find a job in this very, very difficult recession caused by the banking collapse. We want to have more people on. The Deputy will know that in May there was nobody on the TUS scheme. We now have several thousand people on the TUS scheme, and I have liaised with deputies on all sides of the House to ensure that people got an opportunity and that people have taken it up. Since July, we have had the National Internship Scheme, JobBridge, and I'm happy to say that 3,000 people who would otherwise just be on the unemployment register are now getting valuable experience, and the feedback on this is very good. We have a difficult job to do. We have inherited vast numbers of our people being unemployed. We have to remember the people working on low incomes and look after them as well as giving hope and a pathway to recovery for people and families currently suffering the worst effects of the worst depression that this country has ever had, thanks to the unfortunate bank guarantee and the ruination that was delivered to this country by greedy bankers and developers, and unfortunately the people in the party opposite, the principal opposition.
Thank you, Minister.